please join me in welcoming Jeff Edwards.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. The 2012 election has been with us a long time now. It seems like a very long time. And if you're like me, you may be having some election fatigue. I certainly am. I'm really tired now of the partisanship and the 24-hour media coverage, especially before these debates and after these debates, telling us how we should think, and the spin doctors, and the negative advertisements. And we're not even in a battleground state. I mean, imagine what it must be like for those poor people in Ohio right now. It's scary. At this point in the election cycle, I'm just tired of politics and turned off. And I just really wonder, is this how our founding fathers envisioned that our democracy was supposed to work? Sadly, I can think back, and I've felt like this on so many previous elections. In fact, going back to 1980, which was the first year I could remember really trying to be involved in politics. That's when Carter and Reagan were running. And I was a college student, and I was all excited. I was going to get educated, educate myself on the issues, and try to make a really good decision who would be the best president. And I remember by the time I went in to vote on election day, I was so tired of the negative ads. I think I ended up voting for the third-party candidate, who was John Anderson. I think that's who it was. But I was so fed up with the negative ads by the two main candidates, I wasn't going to vote for either of them. Every election since then is somewhat similar. I get hopeful, but I get excited. But by the time I actually go in to vote, I don't feel like I'm voting for the best person for the job. I feel like I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. I don't like that feeling. So what's the problem? Well, I think our system is broken in several ways. One way is all the pundits and the polling that goes on. It tries to tell us how we should think and how we should vote. This does two things. For one, people don't evaluate the issues independently and think critically and come to their own opinions. They tend to be influenced more and more by the pundits and the polling that tells us how we should think and interprets the issues for us. And perhaps even worse is the way that politicians respond to all this polling. They position themselves on the issues, not based on their convictions, but more based on how they see the polls telling them they can get elected. So it's not a healthy situation. I did some research, and polls existed for a long time, but it really wasn't until the 1970s that polls, scientific polling, became very common, and polls started to have a really big influence on the elections. For instance, think of Kennedy and Johnson passing civil rights legislation, which wasn't popular at that time. If polls had been extremely influential in those times, it would have been much harder for those presidents to pass the legislation that they needed to pass. So polling has had a negative influence on how our country is run. Another problem is just the sheer amount of money that's in the political system. I've got a chart here, which I know you won't be able to read the type, but these are bars of various of the campaign presidential costs in today's dollars for various campaigns. The very top one, which is just a very thin line, is Lincoln's campaign. And these are various campaigns. There's one here that sticks out, which was Nixon and Humphrey. But most of them are around the same area. So you look at the last two. The last two bars on this graph are 2004 and 2008. Look at how much spending went up. In 2012, we know it's going to exceed even the 2008. It's going to be estimated at $2.5 billion spent in campaign costs for presidential campaigns. Much of that money is coming from political action committees and outside agencies that don't even have to disclose who their donors are. I really don't think that that is what the founding fathers envisioned when they set up this great democracy. Another problem is partisanship. The Pew Research Group has done a survey to identify partisanship for about 25 years now. They've done it for each campaign season. And what they've determined is partisanship, not surprisingly, has just continued to increase over that time that they've measured it. In fact, it's doubled. So the value gap between Democrats and Republicans continues continues to grow. That's probably not surprising for those of us watching it. Democrats have become more liberal, Republicans have definitely become more conservative, and it's much harder to find people who want to elect moderate politicians who are willing to work across the aisle to get the job done and pass the legislation to solve our problems. So I think that's a big part of the problem. But I don't want to leave everything on a negative note. So I'm going to introduce some perspective, some historical perspective. Things are more partisan now than they've ever been, but presidential campaigns have been messy for the history of our country. Back in the 1830s, there was a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville who toured America, spent some time here, and he wrote a 2-volume book called Democracy in America, which is a classic. It's still quoted today, still very relevant. His insights were amazing. And this is what he wrote back in 1835 about our presidential system. One must always consider the time immediately before and during election as a period of national crisis. At this time, factions intensify their zeal, and every forced passion that imagination can create spreads excitement in broad daylight. The president, if running for re-election, is absorbed in the task of defending himself. He no longer rules in the interest of the country, but that of his own re-election. As the election draws near, scheming grows more active, and agitation is more likely and widespread. The citizens, divided into several camps, the whole nation gets into a feverish state. The election is the daily theme of comment in newspapers and private conversation. But then de Tocqueville adds, in America, the election of a president causes agitation, but not ruin. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I'm going to close with another quote, kind of on the same theme. This is by a columnist, political columnist, who writes for a major publication. And he says about our political system, however much our political campaigns may at times seem to trivialize politics, they have an essential dignity, inherent and indestructible, because through them a great people conduct a peaceful disposition, not just of power, but of authority. That act, viewed against the tapestry of history, is a social miracle, nothing less. Mr. Toastmaster.